This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is Mary Tyler Moore, and I have author Herbie J. Pilato. He's written many books on many subjects on the entertainment field, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Herbie J. Pilato has written many books on many subjects in the entertainment field. He is here to talk about the actress Mary Tyler Moore. Mary Tyler Moore is one of the most acclaimed actresses in television history. And Herbie, thank you for joining me. Before we get started on Mary, can you just give me a couple of minutes of background about yourself and your interest in Mary?
Sure. Thank you, Dan. It's wonderful to be here. Yeah, I grew up in Rochester, New York, which is about 300 miles from New York City. It's an upstate, and it had a wonderful family. We lived in the inner city, and the 1960s were a tough time. So, of course, like many of us, I looked to entertainment for escape. And I wrote about years later when I would grow up and move to Los Angeles. I started writing books and whatnot. And the first book was about Bewitched, which then led to others about the Bionic shows and Kung Fu, and then ultimately a biography of Elizabeth Montgomery, which then led to a biography of Mary Tyler Moore. Who didn't love Mary Tyler Moore on the Dick Van Dyke Show first, again in the 1960s, and then in the 1970s. And from the writing of the books, I ended up doing documentaries, either as a talking head on documentaries that others did or that I produced. And then I started doing live events in the Burbank area at Burbank Barnes & Noble, which led to my own TV show. Then again with Herbie J. Pilato, the first season of which was on Amazon Prime and Shout Factory TV, and we're going to start the second season soon via Zoom. So
what is the name of the Mary book?
I have it right here. May I show it?
Yeah, sure.
It is Mary, the Mary Tyler Moore story. Mm-hmm. And this covers her entire life and career before, during, and after the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Even the last 10 years of her life, which she really did not cover in her own autobiographies, is covered in this book. I wanted to do it because she was such an amazing person. Very complicated, no two ways about it. But she was a good person who did so much, for example, for the Diabetes Foundation. She suffered from that. She loved animals. She was a huge advocate for animals. And she just did so much for women's liberation in general. I mean, Oprah Winfrey, of all people, was inspired to go into journalism because Mary Richards, the character that Mary Tyler Moore played on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, was, in journalism with that TV show or that TV news program, WJM, on the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
So Mary was born in New York, was she not? Tell me a little bit about her childhood.
Yeah, she was born in Brooklyn, and she had it tough as a kid. Her parents did not want her to get into the entertainment industry. They didn't want her to act or dance, and she wanted to do just that. So her dad was pretty demanding, and her mom was an alcoholic, which ultimately Mary admitted to being herself. So it was a rough going there. When she was finally diagnosed with diabetes later during the Mary Tyler Moore Show, combining alcoholism with diabetes, it's not a good combo. But anyway, so she grew up in Brooklyn, and she had an uncle, I believe, who was an agent or something, and he helped her start on her way, and she started early on doing dance as a chorus on shows like the Andy Kaye Show, the Danny Kaye Show, and then ultimately too she became Happy Hot Point, which was her first major commercial when I think she was like 17 years old, and these Happy Hot Point commercials where she was like the dancing Happy Hot Point girl aired during the Ozzie and Harriet Show, which ultimately led to her legs being shown as a secretary on Richard Diamond Private Eye, starring David Jensen, and then the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just looking up some stuff on the Richard Diamond the Richard Diamond Show before we talked, and yeah, it's interesting that her first role, I guess, that was as an actress, her face wasn't seen.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course it was her face that we all loved. It was that adorable face that she brought to Laura Petrie.
Hmm.
And when she auditioned for that, I guess she had auditioned for, I think, the first daughter on the Danny Thomas show left, and they were looking for a new daughter for Danny Thomas. So Mary interviewed for that or auditioned for that, and Danny Thomas is like, honey, you're wonderful, but no one's going to believe that you're my daughter with that little beautiful tiny nose.
Hmm.
So she didn't get that part. But when they were auditioning for Laura Petrie for the Dick Van Dyke Show, which was a production of Danny Thomas's production company with Sheldon Leonard and Carl Reiner, who created the Dick Van Dyke Show, they remembered Mary from her audition for the Danny Thomas Show, and they brought her in to play Laura Petrie, and Carl Reiner was like knocked out by her. He took his hand and put it on her head and walked her into Sheldon Leonard's office and said, "We found Laura Petrie."
The Dick Van Dyke Show is often considered the first sort of adult sitcom, whereas other sitcoms have been family sitcoms, like you mentioned, Ozzie and Harriet, or Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, etc. What do you think set it apart, that show apart? And I know that it was quite honored in terms of Emmys. Did Mary get an Emmy? I think she got an Emmy or two for that role.
Oh yeah, yeah, and Emmy and Golden Globe. Well, first of all, the Ozzie and Harriet show, people put it down a lot or whatever, but it was a really hip show and very well written, kind of like the Seinfeld of its time. Maybe a whole episode on pencils. And Father Knows Best. I love Father Knows Best. I thought it was like a dramedy and very, very well done. It wasn't schmaltzy like a lot of the other family sitcoms at the time. But the Dick Van Dyke Show took everything really to the next level of sophistication. Number one, even though they slept in separate beds,
Yeah.
in those twin beds, Rob and Laura, it was clear that they were in love and very attracted to each other. They hugged and they kissed. So there was that. It was a very sexually obvious show. That's the term. And Mary, of course, had her capri pants, and while others were wearing, like on Leave It to Beaver, you had mentioned Leave It to Beaver, Mrs. Cleaver was wearing the long dresses with the pearls. Mary was, in the capri pants. And also, too, this was the era of John F. Kennedy, and Rob and Laura very much looked like the Kennedys. But one of the interesting things that kept the show so timely is the writing was impeccable, just impeccable. Carl Reiner, genius. Gary Marshall started out on the show. Bill Persky and Sam Denoff, who went on to do That Girl, geniuses. They started out on the show. But one of the rules that Carl Reiner had was no then contemporary pop culture references. So that when people watch the shows all these years later, there wouldn't be some reference to, some wheat germ that was on the market, in 1964. So people would go, what? And they wouldn't get the joke. So those kinds of things, all the timely things of that era were left out, and it was all very generic. The only thing that really is dated with the show is the furniture, obviously, and the clothes. But now all of those are, the way things are today, everything looks good. Retro is in.
Yeah. What was the relationship between Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke, both professionally, as the couple on the show, and also behind the scenes?
Well, first of all, Rob and Laura, very, again, sophistication comes to mind. Even though Rob sometimes is a little chauvinistic, it wasn't a mean-spirited chauvinistic. He was just a victim of his time, and they never set out to be mean-spirited or dominating in any way. That's just the way things were. But at the same time, Laura was a very independent woman. She was the strong woman behind the man for sure. And many times, she would help Rob at the office or whatnot. But like Samantha on Bewitched, it was Laura's choice to be a housewife. She never saw it as demeaning, certainly raising a child. And I mean, my own mom, God bless her, she stayed home and she raised me, and I think I turned out pretty good. And, it's not an easy job being a home parent. So that's the on-screen relationship. The off-screen relationship was very good. Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore had an amazing rapport that they just brought onto screen. And when Mary originally auditioned for the role. Dick thought, geez, is she a little too young for me? You know, she's like 10 years younger or whatever. And, you know, there wasn't any issue there. They said, no, she's fine. She's perfect. And they did years later admit that they kind of had a little crush on each other, which I thought was kind of cute. But after after the Dick Van Dyke Show ended and Mary tried to have a film career, as did Dick Van Dyke, um, Dick Van Dyke did both of those careers kind of like didn't really survive. I mean, Dick Van Dyke wanted to be Mary Poppins, obviously, and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He did tremendous, but Mary kind of sort of didn't. So they ended up coming back to television for a TV show special called Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman, and the other woman was Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
And everybody loved seeing them back on TV, where they, I think, and many other people thought they belonged. And as a result of that special, Dick Van Dyke just gave her the special, really. Yeah. She just let her be the center of it. And because of that, it was a huge hit. CBS says, hey, let's bring Mary back and do the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And then a year later, they did the new Dick Van Dyke Show, which did well, but Carl Reiner ended that because there was some issue about pregnancy and CBS using the word, and CBS didn't like that they used the word at the end of that. So, it was a very interesting way, the way everything developed from the Dick Van Dyke Show to the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And then after the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Mary started doing TV movies. She did Ordinary People. She became a movie star, which is what she really always wanted to be. She wanted to be a movie musical star. But by the time she really came into her adulthood, they weren't making those kinds of musicals anymore that she fell in love with, like the MGM and the Fox musicals of back in the day. She did, you know, Thoroughly Modern Millie, which was really more of a Julie Andrews movie and not Mary's. And that didn't really work for Mary. The last movie she did was A Change of Habit with Elvis Presley, where she played a nun opposite him as a surgeon. And that just ended her career. The issue is that Grant Tinker is really the one who pushed Mary in the forefront of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Okay? He was like an advertiser person who worked on the show and advertising it for, you know, the deals or whatever. And Mary was married at the time. She left her first husband, who she married much too young, and she fell in love with Grant Tinker. They got married, and Grant was the driving force of putting her in this, you know, as a co-lead with Dick Van Dyke. And from what I understand, Mary really is the one that wanted to end the Dick Van Dyke Show. I think Dick Van Dyke would have done another couple years in color. They could have gone to color. Carl Reiner, I think, wanted to move on. But Mary, from what I hear now, Mary was the one that really ended the show because she wanted a movie career, which really never happened until later.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that TV special. I was actually going to mention that because I saw it a couple of years ago on MeTV. That's one of those little rerun networks that's become so popular in the last few years, MeTV, Decades TV, which has prompted me to contact you regarding seeing the Mary Tyler Moore Show on there again. Before we move on to that, though, I do wanted to ask you about the Dick Van Dyke Show seemed to be, in a sense, out of step in a sense with the 60s. But the 60s was all these high concept shows like Bewitched, like I Dream of Jeannie, Gilligan's Island, My Mother the Car, my Favorite Martian, The Munsters, etc. And do you think that because it was grounded in reality, and it wasn't just the home life, but it was the home life and the work life of Rob Petrie, do you think that's what also helped differentiate it from a lot of the other shows, which only lasted a year or two, most of them?
Yeah, well, Bewitched 8 years, Genie 5 years, but the Munsters and the Addams Family, just a couple of years. Well, again, it's the writing. You know, good is good. Whether Dick Van Dyke could have been a warlock, you know, Rob Petrie could have been a warlock, and with Carl Reiner writing that show, and as I say, Bill Persky and Sam Danoff and Gary Marsh and all the other wonderful writers they had, good is good, and people know a good thing when they see it. And the Dick Van Dyke Show is just a good thing. It just happened to be about, you know, a TV writer. Right? There was that entertainment value thing, or that entertainment aspect of the show that people loved. That, you know, Rob worked on a TV show as a writer, the Ellen Brady Show, played by Carl Reiner. And, you know, early television began with variety shows, and then they began with, and then they evolved into variety shows having sitcom characters playing hosts of variety shows like George Burns and Gracie Allen and Jack Benny. They were, playing themselves essentially as the host of a variety show. And then that kind of variety show sort of ended, and they went into the Milton Berle show and the Carol Burnett show. And in the meantime, you had still entertainment aspects of the industry that are brought into a sitcom like the Dick Van Dyke Show. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Herbie, I just mentioned how my genesis for wanting to do a little show, a bio about Mary, was watching the Mary Tyler Moore Show reruns on another one of those rerun networks now called Decades TV. And last year I watched both that and the Bob Newhart Show, which came on in the afternoon when I got home from work after that. And one of the things that really floored me, after probably been 25 years since I saw any amount of those shows in volume, was really how good an actress Mary was as a comedian. There are some actors that I think are better as comedians or comic actors than dramatic actors, and I actually think she was one of them. Another one would be Jack Klugman, who I think was far better as Oscar Madison than in any of his dramatic roles. But she was one of those reactive comedians. She wasn't as obviously reactive as Bob Newhart, who could do the deadpan faces. But you really got a sense of when Lou Grant or Murray Slaughter or even Ted Baxter was talking to her, that she was listening to them. And that persona sort of let those characters grow. So let me just talk about the Mary Tyler Moore Show. You mentioned Grant Tinker. How did that show get started from this special that you mentioned?
Yeah, the special, Dick Van Dyke and the other woman did so very well. And as I say, Dick Van Dyke pushed her at the center of that. And when CBS saw the show, they loved it. And then when they saw the ratings of the show, they loved it even more. So they thought, we need to give Mary her own sitcom. So they ended up having her, play this character, Mary Richards, who got divorced and moved to Minneapolis and to start a new life. But in early test audiences for that version, or I believe even before it got to the filming of that first pilot with that aspect of her being divorced, people were like, wait a minute, you can't star Mary Tyler Moore as a character who's divorced. They're going to think she divorced Rob Petrie, So instead of making her a divorcee or divorcee, they decided just to have her break up with her boyfriend and move and start a new life.
Yeah, and that show too, the Mary Tyler Moore Show, in a sense was similar to the Dick Van Dyke Show in that it, at least the first 3 or 4 seasons, was split between her home life and her work life. You had Rhoda and Phyllis on the home front, and then you had the news staff on the work front. Now this was also produced by the MTM company, which became huge in the 70s in terms of producing shows, and even into the 80s and maybe the early 90s. So was Mary more involved like Lucille Ball was in Desilu in MTM?
Yeah, the Mary Tyler Moore Show ignited MTM, studios. And Mary always said that she was just the face, for MTM Productions, and that was just her initials. But she had a strong voice, and she was a very smart businesswoman. She was a strong voice with Grant Tinker in that company. I believe she had a say over the casting and whatnot for all the different shows, and so she may have said that, no, I'm just Mary MTM in the face, but she was a boss in many ways, like Lucille Ball. And later, Elizabeth Montgomery and Bill Asher, when they did Bewitched in the final seasons, they did Ash Mom Productions like Desilu, and then Mary MTM Productions.
So with the Mary Tyler Moore Show, that ran for 7 seasons. Tell me a bit about the growth of the character of Mary Richards. In the first season, or first maybe 2 seasons, she has the long hair, and she looks pretty much like Laura Petrie. Then she sort of changed her hair sort of midway through the series, and she looks a bit, not just older, but a bit more mature and wiser. Her character isn't necessarily as gullible. talk to me your opinion or your thoughts about the whole arc over the 7 years of the Mary Richards character.
Yeah, no, those are excellent observations, Dan. The first season, however, they actually wanted her to wear that long fall wig to distinguish her from
Oh, it
Laura
was a
Petrie.
wig.
Yeah, it was a wig. In
Oh,
the
okay.
first couple of years, it was a long wig,
Hmm.
and she didn't like it, and she was very happy when she finally got to just do her own hair. So it was really to distinguish Mary from
Uh-huh.
Laura Petrie. But the personality of Mary Richards was definitely bubblier in those first couple of years. And in the third season, when, as you say, she changed her hair, it was her real hair, and she lightened it. And oddly enough, she had the Laura Petrie still look, but it was with a tinted or frosted, whatever they called it in those days. And it was, and she dressed more sophisticated, and she seemed to have aged in not a bad way, but in a more mature way, very much from the first season to that third season. And she started to act different. And she wasn't,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
Mr. Grant. She wasn't so much of that. It was more like, oh, Mr. Grant.
Yeah. What was the relationship between the Mary characters with Rhoda and Phyllis? And was Mary Tyler Moore supportive of them getting their own shows? Because it did change the complexion of the Mary Tyler Moore show when I think Rhoda got it first and then Phyllis a year later or a season later.
Yeah. Mary was, first of all, she was that straight person in the midst of these amazing comedians. And she loved, like you said earlier, playing reactionary. And Rhoda, Valerie Harper was just tremendous. Cloris Leachman, amazing. These people had to have their own series. At one point, I believe Valerie Harper was going to leave the Mary Tyler Moore Show for another network or something. And Stevens was like, no, no, stay. We'll spin you off. And there was rumors that there was some professional jealousy between Mary and Valerie, but they were the dearest of friends. They adored each other. And, certainly they came back years later to do the Mary and Rhoda TV movie, which was supposed to be a pilot or a backdoor pilot for a new series. But, I mean, that movie was just a mess. I mean,
Yeah.
they took these characters who we knew in a live action format with a live audience, and they tried to put it in a movie atmosphere, and you can't do that. You can't change the format of something so beloved and expect people to believe it. So anyway, that was 20 years later. But on the show, in the original show, Mary was very supportive of Valerie getting her own show and Cloris getting her own show. And certainly afterwards, I mean, it was expanding. They were all going to be produced by her company.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like she was losing out. She was only benefiting her company and her.
How about once the show ended, they actually spun Lou Grant off into a dramatic series, which I don't know if it was ever done before or since, where you had a comic character become a dramatic character or vice versa.
That's right. It was historic. It was the first time in history that a sitcom character from a half-hour sitcom was spun off into a one-hour drama. And that show really wasn't even a dramedy. That was a drama. So that was major that, Ed Asner, who's such a fantastic actor himself, that series happened.
There were several famous episodes. Probably the two most famous episodes are the Chuckles dying episode, and then also the episode where Mary, well, the ending episode where everyone gets fired except for Ted. But just recently, a week or two ago, I saw an episode that I really found moving, which was the episode where Lou Grant, his ex-wife, is getting married, and Mary accompanies him to the wedding. And in the end, they Ted and then they start singing what was the song? Anna Maria Alberghetti in a Taxi, Honey, which was a butchering of a popular song with a famed Italian actress from the 60s. There were so many little gems like that where you got a sense that even though it's a comedy, that they were real people. And a lot of people today say that this is the golden age of television now. I think I've always said I think the 1970s were the absolute peak, certainly of sitcoms, and the Mary Tyler Moore and the MTM shows like Bob Newhart. were at the forefront of it. What was your favorite episode or two of the Mary Tyler Moore Show?
Well, first of all, I think today's TV is the dark ages. I don't know about the golden age. There's nothing joyful that I see on today's shows. But and there's a lot of talent in front of and behind the screens, but I don't see a lot of joy or goldenness. My favorite episodes of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, I would go with Chuckles as well, because that was Mary's. I loved all the ones. I loved when Murray had a crush on Mary. Yeah. I loved when Lou and Mary went on their first date and it became romantic and they kissed and then they started laughing because they realized it was so silly that they were becoming romantic. I loved any time that her mother or her parents or any personal side of her would we'd see relatives. I love when Ted Bessel came on from, as her boyfriend. He was the boyfriend on That Girl, which really was the precursor to female independence on television before that led to the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and Mary even acknowledged that. I loved, just so many of them. It's just, I also loved it when they would cross over, like when Mary would go onto the Rhoda series, when Rhoda got married. I loved when they did those kinds of things.
So after the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended, you mentioned she had a few failed TV attempts, but
and I talk about all of that in this book.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Ordinary People. So that was a turn of events, and I have to say that it's been many years since I've seen the movie, but I found I don't know, there was something about it that I just sort of rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, not that it was a bad movie, but it just didn't seem in keeping with me. What was her thoughts on those on that movie? Was that a role that she coveted, or?
She reveled in it.
Yeah.
She really did. Just like Elizabeth Montgomery reveled in doing a case of rape and the Legend of Lizzie Borden after Bewitched. For Mary to do Ordinary People, to play someone so different from Mary Richards or Laura Petrie, was a tremendous thing. And I really think she got robbed when it came to not getting an Oscar for that. She deserved an Oscar. She got nominated, I believe, and I think she won the Golden Globe for that, but she should have won the Oscar. Many people, Mary was tough. Okay, she was a tough woman, tough person. And many that kind of knew her thought that the character that she played in Ordinary People was a little closer to her personality than Mary Richards. And even, people would come up to Mary all the time. That's what I loved about her. She was so candid and honest. People would come up to her all the time and say, boy, I wish I could have been like Mary Richards. And Mary said, me too. I wish I could have been, as happy and joyful and uplifting and upbeat all the time as Mary Richards was. So I think there was something in the character that she played in Ordinary People that spoke to Mary. Robert Redford, who directed the film, used to live next door to her in Malibu, and he's the one who cast her, and he would see her on the beach, sunbathing, and like, well, I wonder if she has a dark side, a dark side. And so he talked about that with her, and she referenced that dark side a lot. And actors are amazing people. They get to explore their emotions for all the world to see in various other characters beyond themselves. And every actor, because I'm a former actor too, and I act still once in a while, you bring a piece of yourself to every role you play.
So let me talk a little bit about her acting on stage, because in looking up about her, after the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended and before, well, I think after even Ordinary People, she spent most of the 80s doing a lot of theater. Had she done theater before, in high school or college, or before getting Dick Van Dyke? Was theater a new experience for her?
No, she was, And television back in the day before Dick Van Dyke was kind of like live theater anyway, you know, performing in front of an audience when she would dance or even do some skits, like I said, on the Daily K show and shows like that. But she also, you know, she was very, you know, she did Holly Golightly, which was her Broadway debut after the Dick Van Dyke Show, before her movies. And so she, you know, she did that, which was a bomb. It bombed horribly, but she had experience on the stage, no doubt. So she just returned to it years later, after, you know, television, because she tried to come back to television so many different times. First with the first Mary variety show, it was called Mary. That didn't work, and then they tried to reboot that, and they called it the Mary Tyler Moore Hour, where she played a character who hosted a variety show, which really goes back to what I was saying before about how, you know, characters or actors played characters who hosted variety shows. And here she's redoing that. The problem why those variety shows ended and did not do well, in my opinion, is because, you know, the Carol Burnett show had just ended. And you don't, you know, the Carol Burnett show is the epitome of what a musical variety show should be. So Mary tried to follow up on that, and it was just a little bit too late. That format, that kind of variety show was dying. It was over. It had been done, and it had been done so well with Carol Burnett. So it's like, you know, people were like, sorry, Mary. And she just wasn't connecting with the audience in a variety standpoint. Then, you know, she did Annie McGuire, which was a half-hour dramedy, and she was so proud of that, but it didn't work.
I remember that show.
And she'd been messing with her face and all the plastic surgery. And, you know, when you have plastic surgery and you're a diabetic, it's not a good thing. You know, I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be. But I'm just thinking, if she would have had all those different surgeries, she had several different teeth implants, and she lost the charm of her chipmunk cheeks, so she had the new cheekbones implant. Whoever Mary was before, you couldn't see her even. So that was, I think, contributed to it. But there was a show she did called Mary, not the variety special, but the half-hour sitcom from 1986 or 1985, 86 that starred Lou Ferrantino. I think that was his name. And there was something wrong with that show, but she didn't like it. She thought it was too mean-spirited, and she asked CBS to cancel it. So, you know, then she tried New York News in 1995, where she played this tabloid editor, and she had red hair. It's like, what? You know, with the surgery and the red hair, Mary Richards and Laura Petrie couldn't be found anywhere. You gotta, you know, I understand that every actor, every performer wants to grow, but you can't lose your look, your core look and your core charm, and all of that was gone in her later roles, in my opinion.
Yeah. So Herbie, you were just speaking on Mary changing her appearance, trying to get away from the all-American Mary that she had grown famous on. Let me talk a little bit about some of what we could call the dark side, as you mentioned, Redford was thinking of. Let's start from the beginning. Did Mary have any, was she like a manic depressive or bipolar or anything like that when she was younger? She was an alcoholic, you said.
Yeah. Well, her mom, you know, like I said, was an alcoholic, and, you know, there's been research and documents and confirms that alcoholism can be genetic. So there's that. But she was also sexually abused as a kid when she was like only 6 years old by a neighbor in New York. And that traumatizes you. You know, certainly research has been documented as this as well. And I don't think she fully recovered from it. And back in those days when that happened, there were no therapies for that. And there was no counselor she could have gone to. So I don't know if she fully recovered from that. And that probably contributed to her alcoholism. So there was a lot going on there. I mean, she was a taskmaster too, and, you know, there were a couple times when she lost her temper on the Mary Tyler Moore show, and people have spoken about that. I don't address that really in my book, but people have said that. So, a very complicated person, but she was a good person. I can't stress that enough. Look at all creative people have their ups and downs. So you're dealing with emotions, the psychology of a human being. That's not an easy thing to do. Artists are interesting, complicated people. And you know what? Just because she would get angry once in a while, or she was an alcoholic, or she had issues of drinking, or this or that, or she didn't always get along with everybody, guess what? She's human. Doesn't mean she was a bad person. It means she was a human person like the rest of us. I mean, I don't get along with a lot of people either. A lot of people don't get along with me, and I have arguments with people. I'm sure you do, and everybody does. But when you're in the forefront, and when you're in the public eye, everything about you becomes magnified. So you can't escape that.
How did the divorce from Grant Tinker affect Mary personally and also business-wise? How did MTM suffer, or did it suffer?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question. In Hollywood, not always, but in Hollywood, usually, not always, when you have a man or a woman who are in business together, Lucy and Desi, Mary and Grant Tinker, Elizabeth Montgomery and Bill Asher, DeWitt, Carol Burnett and John Hamilton, or Bob Hamilton on the Carol Burnett show. Usually, when the show is over that they're working on together, usually the marriage ends with the show. And the missing thing that Mary didn't have when she did the Mary sitcom, for example, was Grant Tinker in 85, was Grant Tinker. He wasn't there to reel her in or to guide her. He knew television. He didn't know movies. He didn't know the feature film world, okay? But he knew what worked on television. And I think that she couldn't find the right property because she didn't have Grant by her side.
And she married a third time. What was her third? Was that the third and final marriage?
Yes, her husband, just an amazing guy, Dr. Robert Levine. She met him because he was a doctor. He's a doctor, and her mom at some point was sick, and the doctor that originally treated her mom wasn't available, and then Dr. Robert Levine was there, and that's how they met. And they fell in love. He was like 15 years younger than her, and she adored him. He adored her. They stayed together for 30 years. Okay, he was dedicated to Mary, and he loved her deeply. I think the two big loves of her life were definitely Grant Tinker and Robert Levine.
And her son died in a sort of freak accident with a gun. Talk about the accident, because I think it led to some passage of laws or something, and also then how that affected Mary.
Yeah, she never really fully recovered from losing her son, and she always felt that she could have been a better mother. And she again, she was so honest. And when she lost him, man, that was it. I mean, she always wanted to be a star, and she never felt she was the best mother raising Richie. His name was Richie, just like Richie Petrie, which was interesting on the Dick Van Dyke Show, played by Larry Matthews. Yeah, and there was some talk, that it was a suicide or whatnot, that it wasn't an accident. But Mary always validated that it was an accident, that he was playing with his guns. He collected guns apparently, and one of them accidentally went off, and it was just horrible. It was a horrible, horrible thing. It's one thing to lose a parent, which I've done. Who's lived a full life. And then it's another thing to lose a child. So I can't even think about, what she probably went through, but she never recovered from it. And she also had a brother who she assisted with suicide, and she admitted that. So that was very, very interesting. And, the character of Beth in Ordinary People, she lost her son to a suicide. So there was that connection. And that, interestingly enough, she lost her son the month or the very time that Ordinary People came out, was released. It was very, very strange.
A couple of months ago, I saw, I think it was a video, an interview with Ed Asner, and it was probably only within the last year or two. I don't remember what show it was on, but he was talking about his now, I guess, close to 50-year relationship with Mary Tyler Moore as a friend, and he said that in her later years, they became less close because she became more politically conservative, whereas Ed Asner was I think he was the former Actors Union president, and he was
Yeah.
very liberal and outspoken. So what was Mary's both religious and political engagement with things? Because one of the things I do know, while she was involved with charities, she wasn't someone who was, say, very vocal about civil rights, or she wasn't. You never saw her marching with people for these causes. Am I wrong?
No, she didn't march, but certainly she later on was, like I said, the head of. She was the spokesperson for Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, things like that, and certainly an animal advocate. She was out there, but I don't remember her marching so much for liberation, women's liberation. They didn't set out to do the Mary Tyler Moore Show as this is going to be a women's liberation movement starter. It just happened. It was just the involvement of it. So what was the question?
Basically, what were her views on both religion and politics over the course of her life? Because Asner
So,
says that she got more
definitely
conservative.
a conservative. She was less conservative earlier, but she was always ultimately conservative. She was raised a Catholic. Mm-hmm. She was a Catholic conservative ultimately. And by the time Mary and Ed Asner worked together again, they did a TV movie. Can't think of the title. Gosh. That they did, but it was his movie, his production company that was producing it, and he hired her, and so there was that, and she didn't like that. She was not the boss this time. On the Mary Tyler Moore Show, it was her production company and her TV show, and Ed Asner essentially worked for her. So when she and Ed did this TV movie later, he was the boss. So there was that. But he also, because he did my show too, then again with Herbie J. Pilato, which is on Amazon Prime and Shout Factory TV, and he said that she wasn't happy. Again, it goes back to her looks. She wasn't happy with how she looked during that movie that they did together. That I can't think the title of. So she had some issues with that. This is very complicated person. They loved each other though, and Ed always said that he told me she made his career. He said that right on my show. She made his career. He was a tremendous actor. He'd done everything from The Fugitive to Route 66 to countless TV shows before the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And certainly he went on to do Roots, amazing, Rich Man, Poor Man. And I think, he did Roots too.
Yeah.
Rich Man, Poor Man, which, he won an Emmy for. So, but the Mary Tyler Moore Show made him, and he always credited her for giving him a career. But yes, the relationship was complicated, and more complicated later on when after the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
So let's talk about her last few years and her death and the legacy of her both as a person and as an actress within television. How did she die? Was it simply the diabetes?
Yeah, ultimately, she had brain. She went on the Rachel Ray Show with Dick Van Dyke for a tribute to the Dick Van Dyke Show, which is so cool because Rachel Ray recreated the Robin Laura's living room on her show, much like Oprah Winfrey had recreated the Mary Tyler Moore set on her show where she had everybody from the Mary Tyler Moore Show reunited. I don't know if you saw that, but that was on like 10 years before Rachel Ray. So Rachel Ray does it, and Mary looks terrific and fantastic, and she and Dick were interviewed by Rachel on the Robin Laura Petrie sofa. It was wonderful. And she had mentioned, I can't remember if she mentioned it online or if I read it afterwards, but the next day after she taped that, she was going to have brain surgery for some kind of aneurysm or whatnot. And she ultimately never recovered from that. And it was just her health just went downhill from there. I think she did like the Rachel Ray Show in 2012, and then she died in 2018, December 2018.
I think it was 17, wasn't it? I think it was 17.
Oh yes, that's right, 17. That's right, 2017. And so for those last 5 years of her life, just wasn't a good thing. It was very, very difficult.
So I noticed there's a statue of her on the Nicollet Mall in Minneapolis of her character, Mary Richards, tossing the hat up in the air, the beret, I guess it was. Um, so where do you put Mary Tyler Moore on sort of the spectrum of American television comedians? You know, there's Lucy. You mentioned Carol Burnett. I guess you could later on you could say Roseanne Barr. Where what niche does she occupy that's hers alone? Do you think?
Well, I'm sure she's always going to be remembered, for Laura Petrie and Mary Richards. And she probably, one of the interesting things is she never really wanted to have, or I never saw Dick Van Dyke on the Mary Tyler Moore show in a guest spot. We saw Jerry Van Dyke, his
Yeah.
brother, and later on, he did a spot on the variety show that she did. But she wanted to distance herself. When she did the Mary Tyler Moore show, she wanted to distance herself from the Dick Van Dyke show. And after the Mary Tyler Moore show, she wanted to distance herself from that. Years later, in the Nick at Night age, in the TV Land age, when it was becoming hip for everyone to be known for their characters, then she became at peace with it. But before that happened, before that peace began, she wanted to try and branch out and do other things, and she did. But the truth of the matter is, she's always going to be known as Laura Petrie, Dick Van Dyke. She's always going to be known as Mary Tyler Moore. Wonderful characters that brought a tremendous amount of joy to the world, and that's not such a bad legacy. And she was okay with that finally. Rosie O'Donnell helped her, I think, come at peace with that, because she would show up on Rosie McDonald and Rosie O'Donnell and play with her Mary Richards character and acknowledge it and finally embrace it. And Elizabeth Montgomery was like that too with Bewitched and Samantha. She finally came to peace with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of Leonard Nimoy, who first wrote a bio in the 70s called I Am Not Spock, and then 30 years later he wrote I Am Spock.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
exactly.
HerbieJPilato.com is your website. If you want to hold up your book again for the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And what book are you going to be writing next, or on what subject?
Well, I'm doing something very different, so I'm not really ready to say yet, but I'm also working on a classic TV history book.
Okay.
That's the positive message of classic television in general, but also another book that it's going to be different from anything I've ever done before. So, but yeah, you can certainly order this personally signed for me through HerbieJPilato.com, but quite frankly, it's a lot cheaper on Amazon.com. The hardcover right now is on sale, cheaper than the paperback. It's only $25 on Amazon and Barnes & Noble too. Oh no, not Barnes & Noble, but Amazon.com.
Well, Herbie, thanks for joining with me. And anyone who wants to hear a little bit more about Elizabeth Montgomery, I'm going to be doing a show with Herbie on her just following this one. So Herbie, thank you, and we'll pick up in a few minutes.